Kör vi strax va? Har du dragit igång? Yes. Hello everyone and welcome to this session, the second day of this conference. My name is Mattias Lindahl and I am professor at Linköping University and also program director of Missouri's. And I will be the chair of this session, this keynote session about the Swedish engineering industry strategy to achieve a resource efficient and circular economy. This session, in this session, we have two very, I would say, good guests. We have Elinor Kruse. She is the director of environmental policy at the Association of Swedish Engineering Industries. We also have Lundström, head of circular economy at Volvo Cars. And together with these two excellent speakers, we will have a nice chat and we will also open up for some questions later on in this session. So with that said, let's start with you, Elinor, and I will hand it over to you so you can present a little bit more about yourself. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mattias. I will try to share my screen. Just a sec. Share. Okay. So hello everybody, and thank you, Mattias, for having me the opportunity to speak for all of you. You asked me to tell you a little bit about our strategy to achieve a resource efficient and circular economy. And I will try to describe the way we are working at the Swedish Association of Engineering Industries. And first of all, I really would like to make a statement for you all, and that is, of course, that urbanization is the driver of economical growth. And therefore, it's so important that cities all over the world really strive towards the climate neutrality, because doing that, they will also ask for more climate efficient solutions from suppliers. And also policymakers can have much more efficient decisions, and also the technology development will go in the right direction. And the second one is really that the different countries and the Europe, of course, really need to have harmonized requirements, and that international standards are important, because then we can have a real industry impact with a global outreach. And then the third point is that Teknikföretagen member companies are in the tech sector, and the technology sector is very global. The value chains are global, the customers are global, and the production sites are global. And for example, I know companies that having forced the production units to be carbon neutral in different countries, and that really have great effects in that region. So I think as a start, these three aspects are very important. As for speaking about circular economy, this is our definition of circular economy stated in 2018. It is, of course, a little bit of utopian, but it's really worth striving for, to having no waste. And Teknikföretagen having members in all the parts of a circular economy, and so this is really our guiding principle. And for me, working with these issues full time, I'm very happy to have the opportunity to do that. I have a third of my time as a close dialogue with members, as for example, James, that will be a speaker later on, to understand their needs, their technology development, the supply chain, and all the challenges that they have. And then 1/3, I lobby in Sweden and I lobby in Europe, having communication and dialogue with all persons that are really affect policy. And then 1/4 of my time, I'm very active in research and development and innovation, because we see that we really need to facilitate the transition needed. And then I have the opportunity to join the board of the MISTA Greece, and thank you, Mattias, for that. And I'm also working with higher technology level programs, because there need to be research and innovation, both long term and more short term. And by splitting my time in these pie and with these colors, I really get a good opportunity to see the different challenges and try to influence in all the areas. The key drivers that we can see. The first driver is really that people need to change their habits. And that is the most important thing. And everybody of us need to change our habits. But doing that, there are 4 drivers that really facilitate the change of habits. And the first one is research and innovation. And we really need to have a very stable area and stable situation for research and innovation regarding money, regarding project, and regarding collaboration. But what's very important is that in higher education and university, all different educations need to have education in sustainability and environment, because decisions are taking on all kind of persons, not just in technology and environmental areas. So economics and also philosophy, everybody need to have a ground and level of environmental knowledge. Then digitalization. Digitalization really enables circular economy. We shouldn't have any sharing situation. There's so many new business models that really are a consequence of digitalization. So there is really a need of spread out digitalization. And the third area is the circular product design and new business models. And they will actually lead to increased circularity in many different ways. And the fourth area is that we need to close the material loops. The waste treatment is really of great importance, and we need to have a better collaboration between the waste industry and the technology industry, so that the technology industry could deliver intelligent solutions like artificial intelligence and sensor technology to really facilitate the opportunity to have more separate waste streams. So these 4 drivers is what we see and that we will work for. This is a little bit interesting news for you. We made media research in October 2019, and there is a trend line in media, and this is international media, both in Europe and in Sweden, when media started to write much more about circular economy, and that was in January 2018. And the words related to circular economy in international media are plastic. That is the dominated word. Then we have recycling, then we have EU news, waste, and sustainability. The drivers, as we see, are not so much mentioned in international media yet. And then I think it's interesting for people working in research and also people working in industry that in Sweden, if you look at the media situation there, we can see that there are 3 major focus areas regarding circular economy, and that is business models, it is waste disposal, and policy instruments. And if we see who is the agenda setter regarding these issues, it is the Swedish industry. And that includes different corporations, large corporations and small ones. And half of them express the opinions that they share with Teknikföretagen, the Swedish engineering industries, and half of them not. But what's very happy and what's very, very good to see is that the second driver, agenda setter for circular economy is researchers. And that is so important that we're having a factor-based discussion and policy development. So taking this these two actors being so active in media is a very good sign and also an important driver for having new solutions. And as you can see, politicians is very far down in the media. And then a little bit about our national ambitions for a circular economy. There really need to be clear goals about the goal to get circular. Nitty-gritty legislation will never lead to a circular economy. We need to have clear goals. But then policymakers need to be very careful because circular economy creates activities in companies. And activities in companies should be managed by companies. And then, of course, we need to have a great policy for research and innovation and digitalization to create these business opportunities. And two things we need worries about is national provisions, because they really creates distortions of the market and creates administration, and administration doesn't solve environmental problems. And then, of course, we need to have a free trade because different countries are specialized in different things. So we really need to have the possibility to trade, free trade. And then as regard of European policy developments, it's so important with a strong European single market. That will be better for circular economy because circular economy is not about small villages, it's about the globe. And then it's also very important for us that any requirement on a product need to be specific and measurable so that we can make sure that we fulfill all the requirements. We shouldn't have any landfill at all. It's embarrassing that still waste are being landfilled. We shouldn't have that. And then the fourth thing is really the importance in defining waste as a resource, because today you can't even trade with secondary products. You can't really, because it's defined as waste, and then we have a very special legislation. So there are really important things that need to be happen in Europe. And I shouldn't say so much more. I would just let you have the opportunity to read our report. It's getting a little bit old now. It's from 2018. It's possible to download it here. And we have and also you can look at our homepage because we're going to have a new report in autumn. So thank you very much for this introduction I had the opportunity to do, and take care and having a really good discussion now. Thank you, Mattias.
Thank you, Elinor, and you will come back when we have more discussions in a few minutes.
I stopped sharing my screen now.
Yes, and now I would like to hand it over to James to share his presentation. James, shoot.
Yes, thank you, Mattias, and hello, everyone. My name, as Mattias mentioned, is James Lundström. I'm the head of circular economy at Volvo Cars, which is a relatively new position. It's been there for about 2 years. There's two of us working on a corporate level, so we're really a jack of all trades. One day we're discussing how to emphasize recycled plastics in design, and the next time we're talking about how solar panels at a factory in China can help us reduce our CO2 impact. And I think Elinor brought up some very important discussions. One issue we see in the word of change, which circular economy essentially is to many industries, is people have to change, and people are willing to change. People are willing to recycle bottles. People are willing to sort their garbage into different fractions. But when they're doing what is probably their second biggest investment in life after a house, which normally is a car, they become a little more egoistic. They are a little more sensitive to things that are close to their heart, the design, the feeling, the emotions, and are not always as rational as from a sustainability perspective you might want them to be. So we are seeing a huge increase in customer interest in sustainability, but not at the level that we would like to see. And much of the change that is being driven within Volvo Cars today is coming from not necessarily consumer pressure, but an internal will and desire to be a truly sustainable company. And let's see if my computer let me change slide. And I think when you mention Volvo as a car maker, everyone sort of tends to instinctively think about safety. We have been known as the leader of safety for I would say essentially the company was founded. And what has happened since 2 years ago is that when you look at the board of directors, the CEO level, the strategies they are working with, they have put sustainable on the same level as safety. And we say that we commit to the highest level of sustainability. Now, you can always argue about what does the highest level mean, but we're using the same statements when we talk about safety, and that has led us to be clearly defined or seen as the leader of safety within the whole automotive industry. And we're definitely aiming to be on the same level when it comes to sustainability as an automotive producer. That, of course, raises a number of challenges, and I think Elinor touched on some of them. One is, which we just mentioned, how do you measure it? What is circularity in a production industry or in an automotive industry? And how do you compare it with other companies who do different type of priorities? That is one of the things that we work on internally on trying to define in a good way. We also face the challenge that the automotive industry is very global and the supply base is to a certain extent quite common. So being a company that tries to stand out means that you end up being very unique towards suppliers who are working with many other companies at the same time. So this, although it will be a very competitive area, there needs to be a lot of cooperation and there needs to be standardization to help this progress. When we started this journey, which was, well, environmental issues have been there for a long time, but defining the targets as so strict and so challenging, we went and looked at the UN Development Goals for how would they apply to us as an automotive producer. We also made a strong commitment to support the Paris Agreement on CO2. So we're looking at 3 pillars that build up our sustainability. We're looking at climate action, we're looking at circular economy, and we're looking at ethical and responsible stewardship. What we're aiming for in these areas is that Volvo should be a climate neutral company by 2040. And we're not just talking electric vehicles. We're looking at production, we're looking at logistics, inbound and outbound. We're looking at CO2 impact from our suppliers, from the parts they produce, from the spare parts and service we deliver to the end of life phase when we come to recycling. In the same way, we work as a circular business, meaning that, yet again, as Elinor mentioned, no waste should ever go to landfill. We should also be a strong customer of recycled materials. We should design our products that they can not just be shredded and recycled at a lower grade, but where you truly can find closed loops. So where our trash could be essentially raw material source for our next coming products, are a second life or a third life solution for a component that we use that then can be, once it's served its useful lifetime in a car with all the legal restrictions and criteria you have there, you could easily use it for somewhere else. And when it comes to ethical and responsible business, there is less defined targets to look at there, but in wake of those targets, we're saying that we should be recognized as a leader in responsible business. And things we're looking at there is that there should never be a supplier or any operations within a company that pays below what is a reasonable wage, that even if we're working in third world countries, everyone should have good living conditions, they should have good labor conditions. There are a lot of aspects, and these are areas that are still being defined. Since we're focusing on circular economy in this session here, I'll go a little deeper there and then I'll leave the floor open for discussions. We have put our sort of long-term stake down at 2040. But just saying 2040 and then waiting to see what happens will not drive action within the company. So we have sort of interim goals at 2025, and then we will work with these goals at, I would say, at 2 to 4 year steps, depending on the area. So when we're looking at circular materials, which is the first step, we're trying to eliminate waste and we're trying to do better material utilization, which means not having waste in production. Then we're looking at bio-based and recycled materials and increase the usage. And we're looking at, by 2025, to have 25% recycled plastics, 40% aluminum, and 25% steel. As it looks right now, the biggest challenge will be plastics, and issues there is a lot has to do with data. when designing a car, there are very few components that aren't there for a good reason, and there are durability criteria, there are strength criteria, there are surface criteria, and getting good data on recycled material is still a challenge in the industry. We also have some, I would say, almost counterintuitive regulations, such as we have the European chemical regulation in REACH, which is a very good thing, but it sets the same very strict requirements on recycled content, which actually increases the cost of recycled material compared to virgin materials. So these are challenges that we're trying to overcome, both through technical activities and also lobbying. Then we're looking very much sort of as the sign that was shown there before of eternity, of how can we repair and reuse and prolong the lifetime of components. We already have a multi-million-dollar business in refurbishing and reusing gearboxes, engines, and a number of other components, but that has to expand. And that is a change both in internal operations, in supplier contracts, but also customer perception, that customers see a benefit and not a disadvantage in receiving these components. And then in general, creating better business opportunities regarding parts and car usage. If you look in research, a lot of increasing the value of material is actually increasing the usage of the product. And as most of you might be able to relate to, a car stands still roughly 90% of its life cycle, because you drive to work, from work, you drive to the store, from the store. So by increasing usage, finding better business models, and looking more into selling transport as a service than just selling a car, we hope to increase the utilization of our materials as well. And the building businesses in that area also creates new drivers for how you use materials, which allows us to challenge some of the internal criteria that sometimes still need to be modified to optimize the circularity of our business. So with that introduction and a little insight to what we're doing at Volvo, I would like to hand the word back to Mattias. Thank you for having us, and I look forward to the questions you may have.
Thank you both, Elinor and James, for interesting presentations. Before I have a short discussion now with you, Elinor and James, I also want to mention that we have a Menti. If you want to ask the panel, Elinor and James, any questions, just go to Menti, and then the code is 811849. With that said, let's continue. And I already got some questions. Elinor, would like to hear your reflections about James' presentation. It doesn't sound familiar.
No, but I think, of course, we are working so very close to our member companies, and Volvo is happily one of our members. But what's interesting is to see how circular economy could be more into the details and how it's getting real. And what's interesting to see is that it's really something that is done as a business. Now we're not talking about environment any longer, but the ultimate effect is of course environment. But what we actually is doing, and Volvo show that they are doing, is that they are changing their business model to save the planet. And I haven't really seen that before. And this is a tremendous change in how businesses adapt after the limitations of the planet. And this is new. It has been growing, and then that they really have goals that are measurable. And what is not measurable is not happening. And that, I think, is the greatest challenge that we have from a political point of view, that we need to measure, but we need to measure in a very, very specific way.
I agree. I've seen it also in other companies. But James, maybe you want to comment.
No, I think I can just reiterate what is being said here is that I've been working in environmental product development in different ways for over 20 years. And I've done my fair share of work in the regulatory affairs field as well. And when I started working with environmental subjects at Volvo, I can admit we were about 25 people, and we were more or less seen as missionaries, trying to sort of embrace the masses to follow us with limited success. And we had some very good projects, but I would say from an overall business perspective, this was unique efforts. And now when I come back to the environmental field, there's a tenfold amount of people, there is a tremendous interest, and there is pressure, not from middle management, but from CEO, from board of director levels, that are challenging us in a way that I don't think actually anyone has been challenged in the company before, because they're not just saying, do something good here. They're saying all the things that Elinor is bringing up as well. Make it measurable, transform it into business, and transform it into profitability. And it can be done. We are very confident in our steps forward, but I'm not going to deny in any way that it is challenging, and there is still some, I wouldn't use the term reluctance, but people need help to understand how do they change from what they've been doing for 10, 15, 20 years into finding alternative revenue streams instead of just keep doing the same thing that you've always done. So it's truly a disruptive shift, and they are never easy in any company, no matter what field it is.
It's actually related a little bit to what has been discussed in the sessions today, the closed sessions, and also relate to previous the discussions yesterday. The fact that a lot of organizations are actually designed to fit a linear model and with a linear way of thinking, and now that is challenged when we have the more circular thinking, and that could cause problems, but also the way how things are measured. What do you see as the major challenges for companies that want to change from the linear types of business models, a way of thinking, and actually moving towards the new way, new types of business models? Elinor or James?
I could say what I see on a general level when we talk to the companies, the companies that are strategic, and I mean, I speak with maybe 10 or 15 companies that are working with circular economy on a strategic level, trying really to be transformative. What they say, everybody, is the difficulties when they're really having new business models is to have them in real, from a financial point of view. It's a tremendous change of how to make business and how to get your earnings and how to get the investors believe in that. And that is also something about measurability, and how do you measure profit, and how do you capitalize on new business models from a linear company that is used to have this putting all the products on the market issue. So I think that is what I can see on a general level, and that should be interesting to hear from Volvo. What is I mean, you have been in car sharing for a long time. You have been in renting area for a long time. What do you see in respect of financing?
Yeah, so I think the way I can answer that is, to a large extent, I agree. At the same time, for the last couple of years, we haven't had a single meeting with investors, with insurance companies, with banks, with any discussions regarding mergers and so on, where sustainability is not on top of the list. There is not a single investor that wants to invest large scale that accepts to do anything regarding, or if you are able to prove to them that you are truly working with sustainability. And I'm not going to dig deep into competitors, but one example is when PSA bought Opel and then sued GM because they realized after the contract was signed that they didn't have patents on the sustainability technology that GM had developed that was sold under the Opel brand in Europe. So GM, the main reason PSA went back and sued GM was they didn't have the sustainability platform they were hoping for. And we have not been involved in anything anywhere near that, but any discussion with investor, apart from the simple metrics of profitability, return of sales after tax and those type of things, the next question is, what is your sustainability plan, and prove that it maintains profitability in your company. And so if you can't do that, you're not at the table. You are not discussing with these companies anymore. And if you're a large-scale company, you simply cannot operate without having a very intricate and detailed discussion with your investors.
Elinor, quick response?
No, I think it's this is also a change, and it's also very, very important, because in having the investors and having them having a very clear agenda for sustainability, they will also driving the change for the companies that are followers. Because Volvo, you are not a follower, you are creating sustainability, and then your suppliers are following. But through working with the investors, all the companies that they invest in will be leaders, and then having suppliers as the followers. So I think it's extremely important and hopeful that we have this situation right now.
I can also say I've seen a big trend now. I mean, now it's about business. It's not only about a single thing, like environmental issues. It's about the future of the companies. I would like to bring up some questions from the audience. One question here is, what are the future skills that engineers should bring along to foster the circular economy? Let's start with you, James.
I think, wow, it's a difficult question. You can take different directions, but I would actually keep it a little simple and say we need brilliant and innovative engineers today as we do tomorrow. To create sustainability is sort of, it's one different perspective of a problem. It used to be, how do you make it cheap? How do you make it durable? How do you combine multiple functions or multiple components into one? And now you add one additional aspect. What happens when the car is no longer in use, or when this component has to be replaced? Is there an intrinsic value in it? Is there a second life? Can we do sold as service instead of selling it linearly as a component? I can talk positively about a competitor, or not a competitor, but a supplier, which is Michelin. They are in the commercial business now, looking at not selling the amount of tires. They're selling the amount of miles you can drive, or the number of landings and takeoffs for a plane, for instance, which challenges their internal engineering in a completely different way than they've done before. And this is the same thing here. So we still need our universities to produce brilliant engineers, and it's not a new unique set of skills. It is continuous innovation, but from different perspectives than before.
Or can you elaborate a little bit?
Yes, because you need to be professional. I think that specialization really are getting more and more specific, and to be really professional, you need to have a core competence. But what I said in my presentation earlier, it's so important that if you are in maths, you need to know what the objective, and therefore all educations really need to have a developed sustainability education in through the planetary limitations and things like that, and chemicals, because they need to have the opportunity and possibility to talk with the drivers of the sustainability agenda, to be able to adjust what they are doing from a circular economy and environmental perspective. So that is important.
Thank you. Elinor, in your presentation, you mentioned that the single EU market is crucial for supporting circularity. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? And James, do you share this opinion?
Let's let Elinor start.
Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, in your presentation, you mentioned that the single European Union market is crucial for
the internal market.
Yes.
Yeah, the internal market is of great importance, because if the technology sector, our members, I mean, Sweden is a very, very small market. We are 8 million persons. And being a company of a global brand, you can't really, the products that we put on the Swedish market is not enough for a sustainable company. We need to put products on the European market or global market. And therefore, we need to have the same requirements on all markets. And the only way to have that is to have an internal market with stable regulations and harmonized regulations. And therefore, if we have a very strong European policy saying that we should have unique and common requirements, we can have them all over the world. And then the companies need to adjust to different regulations in different countries. And that is very important, because if you need to adjust your product for different countries, it's going to be really complicated. So it's quite simple as I see it.
James?
Yes, sorry, I have a phone in the background that there's a beeping noise. Europe is our second biggest market, followed after China. But Europe has historically, and I would say, even though China is challenging on them, Europe has always been sort of the global leader of environmental and sustainable subjects. They were the first with the recycling regulation. They were first with heavy metal bans. They were the first to have a clear chemical policy, and many other countries have followed. And I think Europe has this golden opportunity to help its industry to find profitability and sustainability. And when you do that, you will, my firm belief is, you will end up with a lower overall product cost and a higher profitability for a company once you go through this disruptive shift, which it is for many companies, which will increase and gain competitiveness for those companies who are based in Europe. So I do feel that there is and a strong need for a continued push and support for European industry in terms of sustainability, because if Europe doesn't do it, somebody else will.
Thank you. We are running a little bit out of time, so we have like 2.5 more minutes, approximately, maybe 3. And actually, a little bit to relate the question. Unfortunately, we can't take all your questions that have popped in from the audience, but it's what you said, James, about sustainability, not mainly risk management. 2040 for CE implementation is very far away. Would it be possible to form an alliance of major car companies that together push for CE and sustainability? And related to actually your previous work when it comes to IMDS, what do you think about that? You can maybe explain IMDS as well.
That is, yes, I was a member for about 10 years in the industry and harmonizing how the automotive industry worked on material regulations. I think to a certain extent, yes, when it comes to harmonization, standardization, metrics, and targets, then in the end, just as it was with IMDS, the IMDS was a tool to allow companies to profile themselves in different ways on how to work with hazardous materials and how to work with recyclability. And I think Volvo and a few others really took that chance, and the results sort of speak for themselves. The same opportunity stands here. There needs to be a good platform, and I think there needs to be policy involvement from the European Union in creating the fundamentals. Then let the industry compete, because not only Volvo, but many other OEMs are understanding that overall, this is a business benefit, but it takes change, and it takes change throughout the whole company, not just the top level management.
If we modify the question a little bit, what do you think about this type of creating alliances, Elinor, among companies within the same business?
There is always this about competition rules that is out of what I'm working with. But what we can see is that the technology development is very quick, and the companies really knows that there is another company that they need to be able to develop. And what I can see is that companies collaborate much more and quicker and share secret information between each other, because they develop common products, and they more like business. They are more in sustainable business collaboration in different kind of projects, and then they separate out and they go in. So it's in all areas that collaboration, at least in Sweden, is moving the technology and the transformation. But I'm really not an expert in the regulations and barriers and for collaboration, but it's very important with different kind of collaborations.
Okay, then we have actually running out of time. So my idea was to ask this as the last question, but this is a question to, I would say, to everyone listen to this presentation. I think it's an excellent question. When is the business truly circular? It's a very philosophical question in many, many ways. By that, I would like to thank you, James and Elinor, for your participation in this session. And by that, I would like to close it. And we will soon start the next session. That will be, sorry, I need to look into my program. It will be next keynote, Circular Economy Needs a System Perspective. And that will be by Wijkman, and the chair will be Conny Bakker. And it will start in just a few seconds. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elinor, James, once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mattias.
Sure.
Hello.
I
think, it's Raya? Okay, thanks. I would very much, my name is Conny Bakker. I would very much like to introduce Anders Wijkman to you. I'm honored to introduce him. He sent me his CV, and it's a long and distinguished career that he has had, and I will highlight a few of his many accomplishments here. Anders has been in the past a policy director of the UN Development Programme and Assistant Secretary General of the UN. He was a member of the Swedish Parliament and of the European Parliament, focusing on climate change, environment and health, and humanitarian affairs. He is currently co-president of the Club of Rome, together with Professor Ernst van Weizsäcker. He is a member of the International Resource Panel of the UN, and he chairs Circular Sweden. Also, Anders has authored many reports and books pertaining to sustainability issues, among which a follow-up of the famous Club of Rome's report, The Limits to Growth, which we all know. And this follow-up is called Come On, Capitalism, Short-Termism, Population and the Destruction of the Planet. And these are all topics we have come across in this conference, I think. So for his keynote today, Anders told me, I will listen carefully during the conference and then decide what my main points will be. Systemic approaches will definitely be a point, and the barriers to change another. So for those of you listening in, please make sure to use menti.com for asking questions and use code 811723, which you can also find on the IS4CE homepage. And now over to you, Anders. I'm truly looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Conny. Thank you very much. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to share some of my experience after having worked on resource efficiency issues for quite a number of years. I will focus on a few issues where I think we need to focus a lot of attention and which involve challenges for the new society. Firstly, I will discuss the world after COVID-19 and the opportunities opening up because of all the stimulus programs. Secondly, I will reflect a bit on the recognition that even if we are at an inaugural meeting, that is to say, the inauguration of this society, the issues we are dealing with are not new at all, and we have to understand why progress has been so slow. We also need to understand and proactively address the many barriers to change. The problems that we face are, moreover, also being more difficult because of the lacking of a clear definition of circularity, and as a consequence from that, what indicators to use. Finally, I will touch upon the important role of cities in the promotion of circular economy. And there I will highlight the risk for fragmented approaches. Let me start by saying that we are meeting at a time of crisis. Governments all over the world are struggling to understand how to rebuild their economies after COVID-19. However, the pandemic is but one of many serious risks we are facing. In this globalized and integrated world, we are challenged as well by climate change, the rapid decline of many vital ecosystems, and indeed the loss of biodiversity. Furthermore, we cannot ignore the risks posed by the financial system, with debt levels that are approaching 350% of global GDP. Another major challenge is rising inequalities and large sections of the population in many countries being left behind, which leads to lower levels of trust in society and the rise of populism. Ultimately, according to many experts, democracy is at risk. I could go on. There are more risks, but I'll stop there. Governments around the world have responded swiftly to the COVID-19 crisis with stimulus packages that have already gone far beyond 12 trillion US dollars, 12,000 billion US dollars. But the crisis ain't over. Additional huge sums of public money will be required, and this means that the recovery measures must be carefully designed with clear long-term objectives so as to tackle some of the other risks that are looming on the horizon, not least climate change. Listening to leading economists such as Jo Stiglitz and Nick Stern assert that green recovery packages would offer much higher rates of return, more short-term jobs, and long-term cost savings than traditional fiscal stimulus. But it is far from sure that the majority of governments will follow this kind of advice. In fact, according to a recent Green Stimulus Index report, more than a quarter of the stimulus spending implemented so far by some 20 major economies is likely to cause substantial environmental damage. However, some important decision makers are recognizing the green imperative. The recovery plan presented by the European Commission is one example. It aims to accelerate the shift to a zero carbon or low carbon economy and restore biodiversity. It builds on the thinking in the Green Deal presented in December last year. At least 25% of the recovery plan aims at climate-friendly measures. The rest of the package will be guided by a principle of doing no harm. The main priorities that have been set are building efficiency, clean technology investment, low carbon vehicles, land use, and just transition. And as Martin Stuczny emphasized yesterday, resource efficiency is one of the main objectives, both of the Green Deal and the recovery package. And it seems as if this time, the European Commission, after many years of struggling with the concept of the circular economy, has the right priorities. The main action considered will be, in the language of Walter Stahel, to keep the value and utility of manufactured goods as long as possible. So the Circular Economy Action Plan represents a real opportunity to start moving in the right direction and will require contributions from the scientific community and from this society. We are gathered here for the inauguration of the International Society for the Circular Economy. The issues we pursue, that is to say, the metabolism of the industrial society, are by no means new. We have been reminded of that several times during the conference. Conny, you alluded to the Limits to Growth report. Almost 50 years have passed since the launch, but its key message is still valid, namely that the combination of resource depletion and pollution, if unchecked, will ultimately bring the global economy down. Regretfully, few decision makers listened to the Club of Rome at the time, not to speak of leading economists. The human footprint, both in terms of the atmosphere and vital ecosystems and biodiversity, is growing as we speak. Martin referred to the International Resource Panel with its recent report, Grow 2019, where it estimates that the extraction and production of materials make up for roughly half of the carbon emissions in the world and 80% of the loss of biodiversity. And demand for the materials is increasing rapidly. The world is expected to build as much urban infrastructure till 2050 as we have built until today. And ladies and gentlemen, if this happens with today's materials and today's technologies, we are toast. We can forget about the Paris climate goals. Hence the need for a different approach to material use. A major problem is that we discuss all the challenges facing us within the conventional economic paradigm, where production growth in quantitative terms is the main objective. That system worked well when the world population and the economy was small. In the book referred to by Conny from Ernst von Weizsäcker and myself, Come On, we call this the empty world. Now we live in the full world with a population close to 8 billion and an economy that is more than 10 times larger than after World War II. In reality, we face a systemic crisis. Everything is linked to everything. To mainly measure societal progress in terms of growth of GDP will not result in the kind of society people wish for. The pandemic, not least, has shown us the narrowness of this thinking. We need better metrics that measure the well-being of the population, including healthy ecosystems and a stable climate. And we need metrics that help us to assess material productivity and help us distinguish between material stocks and flows. We don't have that today. One thing that is positive is that awareness among people about the challenges we face is increasing. And I believe, in fact, that the pandemic has helped lead the way. People are much more open to change than before. My hope is that this goes for conventional economists as well, because until now, conventional economists have been reluctant to reconsider their traditional models and thinking, where nature and access to natural resources seem to have been taken for a given. That may have worked in the empty world when the prevailing economic model was developed and established, but it doesn't work in the full world. Yet, very little has changed both in the models and in the training of economists. To quote my friend Cameron Hepburn from the Institute for New Economic Thinking, he recently said, the education of economists take place as if the last 40 to 50 years didn't happen. Give me a break. So one of the key areas for exploration and study for the new society must be the reform of conventional economics. The circular economy as a concept has been around for decades, partly under different names and concepts. While the general principles are relatively easy to understand, there is, as of today, no generally accepted definition. It is rather a metaphor for a number of activities aiming at using resources more efficiently. But even a metaphor needs some rigor. The downsides of not having a clear definition are obvious, including the difficulty to develop and agree upon circularity indicators. As Martin stressed yesterday, we tend to measure the wrong things in the economy, meaning that circularity in all its forms is not accounted for. In the absence of a clear definition, most people tend to believe that the circular economy is about recycling. For quite obvious reasons. The European Commission has spent the last 5 years promoting recycling of waste and residue materials as if that alone would lead to a circular production model. It will not. The Circularity Gap Report issued yearly since a few years at the World Economic Forum is another example. Countries are mainly judged depending on the level of recycling. By doing so, product life extension, which is a key element in a circular economy, or the reconditioning of products, or the turning of products into services, are not looked upon as contributing to circularity. Such an indicator is hardly convincing. Not that I'm against recycling, but it is only one of several R's in the equation, and it has to be put in context. More important are concepts like reduce, reuse, refurbish, and remanufacture. In today's production system, a significant part of the recycled materials are only suitable for downcycling into lower grade products. Moreover, while metals and glass can be recycled on and on and on again, materials such as textiles, plastics, and paper can only be recycled a few times. Last but not the least, even with high recycling rates, the loss of material value in the process is significant. In fact, the way most products are designed today, the loss of value after first single use is substantial. A study by Material Economics in Sweden in 2018 showed that billions of euros were thrown away in Sweden yearly because of that. So another important issue to grapple with for the society will be how to define circularity and what indicators to use. In her keynote yesterday, Tina Bansal brought to the fore some key barriers why the business community is not embracing the circular economy concept more readily. Let me expand on this a bit, because I do think such barriers are crucially important when the aim is to move the circular economy agenda forward. Firstly, raw materials have historically been abandoned and cheap. Secondly, producers have rarely paid for the external costs involved in material extraction and production, which has led to a situation where virgin materials are most often less expensive than secondary materials. The productivity focus in the economy and by the economists has been on labor costs, not on materials. Business models have favored short-termism, high throughput, and short product lives. Product design has not been aiming at reuse and recycling. And I've talked to a lot of designers, and they've told me we were never asked to do this. As was said by the Volvo representative a couple of minutes ago, quality criteria for secondary materials are mostly lacking. Another point is that many products include banned substances and are difficult to reuse and recycle. Another point is, of course, that global markets and supply chains make it difficult to close the loops. And there are finally very few examples of governments introducing incentives for material efficiency, unlike what is the case for energy efficiency. So there we have a long list of issues, and most of them have to be addressed by the political sector. Some of the key policy measures to consider would be a tax shift, lowering taxes on labor and increasing taxes on resource use. In my country, Sweden, 60% of tax revenue comes from taxing labor, only 5% comes from taxing energy, resource use, and pollution. Secondly, remove VAT on all reused materials. Thirdly, introduce design criteria across the board. That is to say, products should be designed for reuse and recycling. Fourthly, public procurement must lead the way and be proactively used to promote circularity in all its aspects. We should also recognize the importance of cross-cutting policies. We should make resource efficiency a priority in climate mitigation policies. We should stimulate skill development, launch innovation programs for circularity. They are still few and far between. We should explore the feasibility of introducing the extended producer liability as a concept across the economy. It was referred to yesterday by Martin. It's a very interesting way of dealing with the issues. We should explore policy measures to address the rebound effect. I don't have time to go into it, but this idea that we can just depend on resource efficiency and do the trick is utterly naive. We need to balance the rebound effects. Otherwise, resource efficiency will just lead to more consumption and more material use. We have to recognize the need for multi-level policy interventions. And finally, as I already said, we have to complement today's flow-based metrics with metrics that assess the stocks. Finally, I come to the cities. Cities around the world have been increasingly proactive in the field of circularity. Organizations like CE40Cities, OECD, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Climate Kick, GEL, ECLI, and Citra have provided leadership. We have seen the emergence of numerous examples of promising practices in key areas like building and construction, mobility, energy, waste management, food waste, and nature-based solutions. Networking and experimentation have played key roles. Cities offer, in fact, a major opportunity to drive systemic change in the economy. From scaling demand, they can evolve, becoming the largest market driven by policy incentives, such as procurement, regulations, and standards. And by being the problem owners, that is to say, facing high levels of material throughput, of waste, pollution, and carbon emissions, cities have the opportunity to drive change through innovation along the value chain and design processes in all areas from policy and infrastructure to products and services. One of my hats today is not only the Club of Rome, but also Climate Kick, the largest public-private innovation partnership in the EU, focusing on climate innovation to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Circularity is one of our main priorities. We were set up by the European Union in 2010, and we have presently more than 400 partners from the business sectors, universities, and cities and regions. Over the years, we have learned that a business as usual or supply-focused approach to innovation runs the risk of bias towards single-point solutions of an incremental nature. Such solutions are unlikely to address climate change at the speed and scale we need. If I turn to cities and their way of promoting circularity, I also discern the same tendency as we have seen in terms of climate mitigation in general, namely a fragmented approach, vertical interventions, single-point solutions. There are exceptions, but that's generally the rule. Many of these efforts are worthy and do bring about improvements in material efficiency as well as reductions in pollution. And such solutions rarely achieve systemic change. That is to say, the transformation needed. The situation is, by the way, not improved by the way city governance is organized, most often in parallel silo-based structures. In Climate Kick, we have chosen to position ourselves as an orchestrated innovation ecosystem that connects demand and supply in catalyzing transformational systemic change, working closely with demand-side actors and those with high ambition for change. We work with problem owners to deliver a transformation service that can help cities, regions, countries, businesses unlock the fast change and large-scale change that is now needed. It takes the form of, in our case, deep demonstrations, each anchored by one or more problem owners. A few examples of what we are doing is the following. We recently had an agreement struck with the Slovenian government to help the country move from a linear to a circular production model. We are involved in altogether 5 sectors of the economy. Our cooperation has, by the way, led to several other member states showing interest to do the same. Another example is an agreement with the regional government of Upper Silesia to help the region to transform from a coal-based economy. And another is, of course, the agreements with altogether 15 European cities, among them Madrid, Milan, Vienna, Malmö, and Krakow, to help them decarbonize within 10 to 15 years under the motto of healthy and clean cities. Our focus is broad: smart energy systems, retrofitting of buildings, smart mobility, nature-based solutions. These were just a few examples of the deep demos that we have initiated. Once up and running, the idea is to use the results for upscaling and outscaling, that is to say, sharing the practices with other regions and cities, and indeed influence governance and policy. Our systemic approach is increasingly met with keen interest from the EU Commission, member state governments, regional governments, and cities. And we believe only systemic approaches can bring about the necessary transformation to a low-carbon circular economy. So in the area of research and innovation, this means that Europe needs to co-create multidisciplinary systemic solutions at a much greater pace than hitherto. It's a tall order for Horizon Europe, and I suggest for this society. To conclude, while the main motive behind the move towards a circular economy is related to the effects on the environment, there are several strong co-benefits. The most obvious is the material values to be captured and the money saved. There is a lot of waste in today's system. In addition, there are a multitude of social objectives to be harnessed. Net employment will, according to many studies, be positive. Entrepreneurial activity is likely to flourish in areas like repair, maintenance, refurbishment, and remanufacturing, in the sharing economy, and not least in turning products into services. Social cohesion is likely to benefit. An economy built increasingly on the offering of services rather than products and on the concept of a sharing economy will result in a large number of interactions between citizens that are likely to enhance quality of life and, more specifically, the level of trust. So, ladies and gentlemen, we ought to have a bright future ahead of us, provided we dare challenge both the incumbents, conventional economics, and dare leave behind vertical and silo-based structures in favor of systems design and systemic approaches. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Anders. Thank you. It was an amazing bird's eye view of all the research challenges that are facing us as the Society for Circular Economy. For those of you listening in, we still have a few minutes to have Q&A, and you can use menti.com. I'll just repeat the code 1811723, and we already have a few questions in. So, Anders, if that's okay with you, I'll just launch into a question. Fine. From the audience. Yeah, good. So the question is, where are the major research gaps in systems thinking towards a circular economy in the next 5 years? That's a big question. Where are the major research gaps in systems thinking towards a circular economy in the next 5 years?
Well, I think that we are poorly organized, first of all, because the scientific community, universities, academia in general, is in fact very silo-based. There are thousands of disciplines and sub-disciplines all over the world, but there are very few programs aiming at understanding the whole and bringing things together. So I think we need a lot of efforts in the academic community. And the interesting thing is that whenever I attend conferences and talk about this, people tend to agree. But when they go back to their university or their academic institution, they are constrained or confined in their silo or in their vertical structure. That's where they have their appointment as a professor or whatever. That's where they get their budget, etc. So I think this will require almost like a revolution in universities and scientific institutions. Then more specifically, I think what is very much needed is to help each other to look for synergies and trade-offs between different goals and objectives. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, there is a tendency to try to meet one goal at a time. That's not going to work. We need to understand the synergies, and we need to define much better how we can work together. So that's the best answer I can give in a few minutes.
Nope, sounds good to me. I have another question. You said during your talk that people, due to COVID, I liked the fact that you brought in the whole COVID crisis, actually. You said due to this whole crisis, people are now more open for change, it seems. So how can we harness this? Do you have any suggestions or ideas?
Well, I think the most important thing is now to make sure that all the recovery money is not spent to go back to normal, but rather to build back better. And I'm very, very encouraged by the European Commission, because what they have put on the table is really to build back better. When I look at Mr. Trump, it's entirely the opposite. He is spending a lot of money to bring back to normal polluting industries. And he's even relaxing environmental standards and regulation. So these are two opposites. Within the European Union, you have member states who are also pursuing this Build Back Better strategy. France has done a lot already. I heard signs of Germany, etc. So I think this in the short-term perspective, this is very, very important.
Yeah.
And by all means, use the pandemic as an example that many years ago we were told about the risks, but we didn't do anything.
And we have maybe risks, also,
yeah, we have risk in other areas, in other sectors, and we have to go from this short-termism to a more long-term perspective and be ready to spend money to increase resilience and to reduce the risks. And I think the pandemic is a perfect example what could have been prevented and which wasn't prevented.
Yeah. So one final question, maybe throughout your long career, have you ever come across a perfect storm like we are currently experiencing with all these different stresses on the planet at the moment, including pandemics?
No, as a matter of fact, I do give a speech quite often, and the title is The Perfect Storm, because we are in the perfect storm. So I agree with you. What I didn't touch upon was the exponential technology dimension, with all its opportunities, but also with quite serious risks. And the fact that decision makers don't really understand what's going on. They are so far away, and we would need policy frameworks to guide technology in the right direction and to help the sustainability and the circularity agenda. That's not really happening. And it will not happen by itself, and it will not happen from a business community that most often is very short-term in nature and normally doesn't earn revenue by addressing public goods. So we need cooperation between the public sector and the private sector. And I think it can be done, it should be done, but we need incentives, we need policy frameworks, just as we need for climate.
Thank you very much, Anders. I think I should hand over back to Mattias now for the closing discussion, which will be hosted by Walter Stahel. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone, and we will be back in like 15-20 seconds. Some cameras.